Good morning everyone. Today we're going to have a video interview with Judith. This interview is for the special issue of EL.LE, Educazione Linguistica and Language Education, a special issue on special learning needs in the foreign language classroom. Judith is a leading expert on deafness and foreign language teaching, and she's also the co-author of the book Deaf and Multilingual. So, Judith, I would like to ask you some questions on foreign language teaching to deaf students. According to the communicative approach, which has been to date the most one of the most influential theories in foreign language teaching, learning a foreign language means learning to communicate in a foreign language. So, the question that I would like to ask you is, how is communication affected by deafness? And how can deaf students try to overcome these barriers?
Deafness is a spectrum from mild hearing loss to severe perceptive loss. Each deaf person hears differently. But deafness is not just a matter of volume or the loss of volume, but also a loss of frequencies. And it's this loss of frequencies that most affects deaf people's ability to learn foreign languages. For example, a person who can't hear high frequency sounds, like for example S or Z, will have trouble, for example, making plurals in the English language and may have problems in hearing other languages or the whole range of other language speech sounds. Often speech is affected by hearing loss, so pronunciation of new speech sounds can be made much more difficult for deaf students. Another factor is the access to their own native language, or EL.LE, which might be different from the sign language that they use. So, for example, British deaf people who use English as their EL.LE, but also use British Sign Language, will use completely different grammar structures in the two languages, because British Sign Language, the word order and the grammar structure is more similar to German than it is to English. So that will make a difference in terms of their base language or the base that they're using to learn the new language, which might be significantly different to their hearing peers. Lip reading isn't foolproof. For example, only 40% of British or English speech sounds are actually lip readable. Things might look identical on the lips, so for example, it's very difficult to see the difference between P's, B's and me's. They all look the same, but obviously sound very different. Different accents look very different on the lips as well. Having a New Yorker and a Londoner say the same things can look completely different and may actually throw the deaf learner completely if they're relying on lip reading as a strategy for communication. Tone languages might be extremely difficult for deaf learners to learn, just because they will not get the subtleties of the slight differences in sounds that tone languages require. So what strategies might deaf learners use? Well, from my point of view, really the most important thing is to find out what the motivation of the deaf learner is. Why do they want to learn a foreign language? Is it because they would like to visit friends and relatives abroad, they wish to travel, they might need to learn it for their job, or they might just have an interest in just learning a different language just for the pleasure of it. But finding out what the motivation is will actually allow you to narrow down which elements of the communicative approach are actually key to the deaf learner. They may only want to learn to read and write the language, and they may want to learn to lip read it. They may want to learn to speak it, depending on if they use speech or if they don't. So once you know what the learner wants to focus on, then you can actually develop strategies to help them achieve their aims. One thing, however, is clear. The set of strategies that you use has to be different for every learner, because every deaf learner is different, hears slightly differently, and has different approaches to their own communication, never mind the communication that they would like to adopt in a foreign language. So some strategies might include volume augmentation through hearing aids and radio aids, providing support staff like sign language interpreters, specialist language assistants, note takers, lip speakers, and other means of augmenting the recorded language aids in language labs, for example, providing transcripts, for example, and making adjustments to your teaching so that differentiation is possible and so that you can actually meet with, so you can work effectively with the deaf learner to overcome any barriers.
Thank you. Well, the second question, well, I would like to know, in the last 60 years, a wide range of approaches and methodologies have been designed for mainstream classes. So, are there any research studies that highlighted, in a way, the impact of those methodologies and approaches on deaf students?
There's been little research on this for deaf students, and there's been little research on the topic generally, and in my experience this has actually led to deaf learners being excluded from foreign language classes because it's just seen as something that deaf people can't achieve, or it's just too difficult to facilitate their access to foreign language classes. So deaf students have traditionally been encouraged to focus on other subject areas that they might, or that it's felt that they're more suitable to. I think in this day and age that's not really appropriate anymore. I think if deaf learners would like to learn a foreign language, then they should have the right to do so. So this denial of learning is still happening today. I know of a case recently where a Welsh woman wanted to learn Welsh but was denied that opportunity because the people at her local college felt that she wasn't able to. And although she's a postgraduate and a successful lawyer, she couldn't actually persuade them to even let her have the opportunity to try. Like I say, I think that is unacceptable these days.
Thank you. In your book, Deaf and Multilingual, you discuss a wide range of strategies to promote foreign language teaching on deaf students. So I was wondering, what are the methodological criteria of these strategies? I mean, are there some strategies that are proven to be more effective on deaf students, and on what basis from a theoretical point of view?
Our book, Deaf and Multilingual, was written by 3 authors: a deaf and British teacher of French, a Dutch-British sign language interpreter, and myself. I'm a balanced bilingual in German and English, and I've worked with deaf people for many years and run various communication support services at higher education level in Britain. Jointly, we had a lot of experience of both learning foreign languages and teaching them to deaf students. We collated our experiences of best practices into the book and tried to make it as accessible to language teachers, deaf students and support staff, and to provide them with strategies of how to actually make the language learning environment accessible. We did a lot of research on how deafness would affect not just the 4 communicative elements of the communicative approach, but also how to make the language classroom accessible as well in a physical way. We don't believe that the opportunity to learn foreign languages should be denied to deaf students. Our message was all about how to make it happen, not what is impossible or what is difficult. But I will say that it's not easy to make the language learning environment accessible for deaf students, but with a little help and creativity, it can make all the difference to the learning experience for the deaf student.
Thank you very much. So the last question, when speaking about special needs education and foreign language teaching, the issue of inclusion cannot be avoided. So is it possible to teach languages to deaf students in an inclusive way, and how can inclusion be achieved?
I think the inclusion of deaf students is on a spectrum, very much like deafness itself. If by inclusion you mean that every deaf student should be able to learn every single part of the communicative approach and be able to master a foreign language equally to their hearing peers, then I don't believe that that's possible. It's not possible in every case. Some deaf learners can learn all aspects of a foreign language. Some can't, some don't want to. So it's really about helping deaf learners achieve the level of foreign language learning that they themselves strive for. I think it's unrealistic to expect deaf learners to be able to learn a foreign language equally to their hearing peers. But then I also believe that it's unrealistic to see a group of hearing learners as a homogeneous group and expect all of them to learn it equally, fluently, or equally well as well. I think once the motivation of the deaf learner has been established, then it's time to look at the strategies that the whole team, and by the team I mean the teacher, the language assistants, the support staff and the deaf students and the hearing learners. If they can work as a team, then you can establish the strategies that are required in order to make the language learning environment accessible. What I think is unacceptable is the deliberate exclusion of deaf learners and dismissing their abilities and not focusing on their abilities but just focusing on what isn't possible. There is a degree of differentiation required. I also think that the exam boards need to adopt quite a high level of flexibility when dealing with deaf learners, and they should actually have the opportunity to be examined on the aspects that they're good at and that they're motivated to learn, rather than being set up for failure by forcing them to undertake examinations, for example, in listening practice or speaking practice, where they have no chance of succeeding. Or they may have no chance of succeeding, but some deaf learners won't, and it's important to focus on the abilities of the deaf learners and not set them up to fail. But yes, I think deaf learners can and should be included.
So, thank you very much for your cooperation, Judith.